She woke up expecting another exhausting morning, another day of struggle, judgment, and survival. Instead, she froze. Standing in her kitchen was a man who represented everything the world had told her she would never reach. A powerful CEO, calm, uninvited, making breakfast as if he belonged there. For a black single mother who had spent her life being overlooked and underestimated, this moment felt unreal and dangerous. How did he get there? Why her? And what he said next would force her to confront a truth about race, power, and dignity that she could never unhear. Was this an act of kindness, or the beginning of something far more unsettling? Before that morning, her life followed a rhythm shaped by exhaustion and resilience. She was a black single mother balancing 2 jobs, early alarms, and the quiet pressure of being judged everywhere she went. Each day began before sunrise, not by choice, but by necessity. She packed lunches, checked homework, and moved through her small apartment with practiced efficiency. There was no room for mistakes. Society rarely forgave them. Work was never just work. It meant navigating spaces where she was questioned more, trusted less, and watched closely. Promotions passed her by. Compliments came wrapped in surprise. She had learned to lower her expectations, not because she lacked ambition, but because disappointment had become too familiar. Survival mattered more than recognition. Her apartment was the one place she felt in control. Modest, quiet, and predictable. It was where she could breathe without explaining herself, where her guard finally dropped. Nothing extraordinary ever happened there. And that's why the morning felt so wrong the instant she opened her eyes. Something was different, not loud, not chaotic, just off. The air felt heavier, charged with an unease she couldn't place. She assumed it was stress, the weight of another long day pressing down before it even began. She told herself to move, to get up, to stick to routine. But routine shattered the moment she realized she wasn't alone. Her entire life had taught her to be alert, to recognize when something didn't belong, when safety could no longer be assumed. The world had not been kind enough to allow innocence, especially not to women who looked like her. What she didn't yet understand was that this moment was not random. It was connected to choices she didn't know she'd made, to assumptions others had formed about her without permission. And as she stepped closer to the truth, she stood at the edge of an encounter that would challenge everything she believed about power, race, and who was allowed to cross certain lines without consequence. Her instincts took over before her thoughts could catch up. Every muscle tightened, every sense sharpened. The man in her kitchen moved calmly, deliberately, as if this space belonged to him. The smell of food filled the air, warm and familiar, clashing violently with the fear rising in her chest. This was her home, her one place of safety. And yet, power had somehow stepped inside without knocking. As her mind raced, fragments of her life began colliding with the present moment. Years of being overlooked at work. The way supervisors spoke slowly to her, as if competence needed to be proven again and again. The way security followed her in stores while others browsed freely. She had learned that authority rarely arrived with explanations, especially when it involved people who looked like her. The man carried himself with the ease of someone who had never been questioned. His posture reflected confidence shaped by boardrooms and privilege, not survival. She recognized that kind of power immediately. It was the same power that signed paychecks, decided layoffs, and shaped lives without ever seeing faces. The realization made her stomach sink. Whatever the situation was, it was already unbalanced. Her thoughts turned to her child, still asleep in the next room. The stakes shifted instantly. Fear became sharper, heavier. She measured every movement, every breath. In the world she knew, misunderstandings could escalate quickly. Being a black woman meant danger didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrived politely, wearing a smile, carrying authority instead of weapons. As the moment stretched on, the truth began to surface in pieces. This wasn't random. It was connected to her job, to a decision made far above her pay grade, to assumptions formed without her consent. She realized she was being seen not as a person, but as a symbol, a story someone else wanted to control. The weight of that understanding pressed down on her chest. She had worked endlessly to stay invisible, believing safety lived in compliance. And now invisibility had failed her. Someone with the power to disrupt her life had crossed a boundary she didn't know could be crossed. What unsettled her most was the calmness of it all. No raised voices, no urgency, just certainty. The kind that comes from knowing the system bends in your favor. She wondered how many times this man had entered spaces uninvited and never been challenged. How many lines he had crossed without consequence. Her fear mixed with anger, then with something deeper, resolve. She had spent her life shrinking to survive, but standing there, watching her reality being rewritten without permission, something inside her hardened. This was no longer just about shock or confusion. It was about dignity, and as the truth of why he was there edged closer to the surface, she sensed the moment approaching, the point where everything would either break open or collapse entirely. Whatever came next would change her life forever. The morning ended without sirens or raised voices, but nothing about it felt ordinary again. When the CEO finally left, the apartment felt smaller, quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She stood alone in her kitchen, staring at the half-cleared plates, trying to steady her hands. What had unsettled her most wasn't just his presence, it was the realization of how easily her life could be entered, evaluated, and altered by someone who had never asked permission to see her as human. In the days that followed, she couldn't return to the comfort of routine. Every interaction felt sharper. Every smile from management carried weight. She understood now that the system she had spent years navigating carefully was never neutral. It favored confidence shaped by power, not resilience shaped by survival. And yet, something in her had shifted. Fear no longer sat alone in her chest. It was joined by clarity. She began to see how often people like her were expected to be grateful for attention instead of respected for effort. How acts framed as generosity could still carry the shadow of control. The encounter forced her to reclaim something she had been taught to suppress: her right to boundaries, to dignity, to be seen beyond stereotypes and assumptions. This wasn't just her story. It was the story of countless Black women whose lives are scrutinized in silence, whose spaces are treated as accessible, whose strength is mistaken for permission. Racism doesn't always announce itself with cruelty. Sometimes it arrives disguised as concern, authority, or opportunity, testing how much intrusion a person will endure without protest. She moved forward changed, not because someone powerful had acknowledged her, but because she had finally acknowledged herself. And that is where real resistance begins, not in grand gestures, but in the refusal to be diminished. So when moments like this unfold around us quietly, and without witnesses, the question remains: will we keep excusing them as misunderstandings, or will we finally recognize them for what they are, and choose to stand on the side of dignity?